Welcome to our new season of Thursdays with ThirdPath live podcasts. Every episode, you will meet thought leaders, role models, and change agents connected to the ThirdPath community. We've got an exciting season planned where we will be exploring why the new ideal employee is someone just like you, someone who wants to integrate work and life. And if you're inspired by what you hear today, please share our podcast with some of you know and join us again next month. All right, so today we're going to be talking a little bit about this feeling that many of us might experience, where if you think about our lives as kind of a glass of water, sometimes it feels like that glass is overflowing with too much going on, too much work, too much life. Sometimes it's even both that feel like it's just too much. And unfortunately, a lot of times we feel like maybe we're the problem. But I hope today's live podcast helps you see that this is not as simple as just blaming ourselves. So what's filling up our glass? For those who are listening in today, not seeing the images in our YouTube video, I'm showing 6 different parts of a glass. The first part is the tasks at work that you're responsible for. And sometimes organizations just give you too long a list of important tasks. Or maybe you're doing a new task and it's just very hard to predict how long it's going to take to get it done. Or maybe you're just doing too many low priority tasks that take up your whole workday. But if you're a team leader, it's also who your team is that makes a big difference. Frequent turnover can really cause problems for leaders, and a skilled manager will be able to build a strong team where everybody is supported to work in a more flexible way. But that takes time. Here's the one that I think Alex is going to be talking about with me. Alex Pang is the author of Shorter. You'll hear a little bit more about him in a little bit later. It's the idea that we might have some work norms in our organizations that are perpetuating a problem of overwork. One that he talks about in the book is meetings. Maybe too much of our days are spent in meetings. You don't have any time for quiet, focused work. Another one is if you manage clients, maybe there isn't any norms that there's some limits set on how often or how easily a client can get a hold of you, maybe even getting a hold of you on vacation. But what we're really trying to talk about today in a few different ways is this concept of boundary setting. And what you're going to see is that when organizations get smarter about boundary setting, that they can really create a smarter workplace for everybody involved. And so in particular, a 4-day work week or a 32-hour work week that's very clear in its goal of setting those boundaries helps us get smarter about how we get our work done. At ThirdPath, we don't actually do a specific 4-day work week, but everybody does work reduced hours. And we are very intentional about the boundaries of when we're working and when we're not working. And we'll probably raise that issue later today because this is the big issue. Are people in your organization encouraging you to set boundaries, or are they letting work spill into all parts of your life? And of course, there's our own lives that can influence the situation. You know, when I was going through elder care, boy, was it hard to manage work and life responsibilities. And what we've been talking about all year long is that there are certain skills that you need if you want to follow an integrated life. And this is something else that we've been using our season of live podcasts to talk about, these work-life integration skills. And we'll be sharing some of those today as well. In fact, if you search Thursdays with ThirdPath on the website, on our internet, you will find our most recent live podcasts where we talked about some of these skills: anticipating the future, plan and prioritize, cultivating self-discipline, creating quiet work time, using technology strategically. So we've already covered some of these skills and how we can develop them both on the work side and the home side. Today, I wanted to really zero in on some additional skills. The importance of good communication, That's what makes it work at ThirdPath. If we want to support people to have time for their lives, it's all about really good communication. It's also about something we call a triple win boundary. It's the idea that when you're looking for a flex solution, it's a little about what you need. It's a little bit about the work you do. Different jobs require different flex solutions, but it's also keeping in mind that you need a solution that works well for your colleagues at work and your clients. So who you work with, that's the triple, that's the third. Who you work with is an important part of your flex solution. And, that we also will be talking about this concept of taking calculated risks. Everybody in the ThirdPath community has been taking some calculated risks to put these ideas into practice. And we'll be talking about that in particular today. But what I want to point out is when we get Alex on and talk a little bit more about what he's been doing with helping people who work in 4-day work weeks or 32-hour work week organizations, interestingly, the risk that you need to take decreases because the whole organization, from entry level to executive level, is doing the same thing. They're all working a 4-day work week or striving to work for a 4-day work week and understanding that if they're not succeeding, there's something wrong that they need to figure out at the organizational level to help everybody achieve that goal collectively. So without further ado, I want to invite Alex to join us. He's the author of 3 books. Mostly we are talking about his wonderful book, Shorter, today. He's also recently joined the 4-day week global organization. He's also a father and practiced some of these ideas in his own life. So welcome, Alex. Welcome. We're so glad to have you here again.
Oh, great to be with you again.
And when you see me talk about what's filling up our glass and the concept of boundary setting, how much of that sounds familiar to you and the work you've been doing to help organizations become 4-day work week organizations or 32-hour work week organizations?
Yeah, so the first thing that strikes me is that for companies moving to 4-day weeks, establishing and learning how to maintain boundaries actually is a really important practice. In that, it's not just about doing the work in 4 days and having a boundary between that fourth and that fourth and fifth day, but also within the work day. There are lots of companies do have practices where they will set aside times for everyone to engage in deep focused work. You have permission to be a little antisocial, not answer the phone or check email or so on. But also balance that with times where, coffee breaks or group lunches. And I think that in a way that helps at work, both to sort of help people have more time to do the stuff that really matters, to set aside particular time for, meetings, either internal meetings or meetings with clients, without also sort of destroying the kind of social life of the office. And I think in a way it's one of these simple everyday practices that turns out to carry some bigger lessons about the importance of maintaining boundaries as a strategy for doing better work and for having a better life. That it's a lovely demonstration of how our assumption that that if you really enjoy what you do, or you're passionate about your work, or you do work that matters, that it really should spread out across your entire your entire day. This is certainly something that many of us it's a practice a lot of us are familiar with, but it turns out it doesn't have to be the only way that we work. And that not only are there these alternatives, but it's an alternative that we can practice, we can practice very effectively if we do it together, right? Yeah. That I think that's the other really important key, that the search for this kind of balance or boundaries is something that can put us in conflict with our colleagues if we just try and do it ourselves. But when you do it as a group, it turns out to be a lot more sustainable and powerful and viable. So so that's what I'm seeing in the companies I'm working with around boundaries.
Yeah. And I want to pick up on the word viable because for those of you who are listening in today, Alex researched over 100 organizations that had moved to a 4-day work week or 32-hour work week, and they all were paying their employees the same wage at that
Right.
different number of hours of working, because, by the way, the organization continued to be as profitable when it went to this different approach. So what Alex is talking about is something that ThirdPath's been looking at for years, which is when you encourage people to have a whole life and have time for a whole life, that they actually get smarter about how they approach it. And Alex mentioned a few of those things already. And I love that you raised that it's also really being thoughtful to create time to be connected, because in our increasingly hybrid workplaces, turns out connection is really, really important. And we'll circle back to that. But I wanted to underscore that this is organizations that are paying the same amount of money for a 4-day work week or 32-hour work week because they've been able to remain as profitable with people working less. Talk about reducing the risk. You now have happier employees who have more time for their life in a world that is going faster and faster. It just seems like such a great solution for the future of work, where people do have commitments outside of work, but do feel passionate about the work they're doing. And you're creating an answer where they can bring their whole selves to work and not feel so distracted by their lives outside of work. What are some of the barriers or resistance to this model? It seems so obviously good to me. Where's the resistance?
In terms of sort of risks, I think that what you see is companies generally looking to a 4-day week when they have some kind of existential crisis, right? But you've got challenges with recruitment or with retention of key people. You have a founder who is, who sees they've been, is going to burn out in the next, 6 months if they don't make some radical change. And so really there's a category of companies who feel like they have nothing to lose. And the 4-day week is a way of, obviously could do great damage to their organizations. And what we see is that, across all of these companies, you see improvements in retention, you see, often multiples, you get better, higher quality applicants applying for open positions, especially in small companies that are competing with much bigger, better funded ones for talent. And generally it creates an environment in which the work becomes more sustainable and more doable for everybody, even though they're doing the same amount of important work. Right, they're being more. Partly, it's about getting rid of things that don't matter that much, or outsourcing or automating less significant tasks. Using the 4-day week as an incentive to really rethink how the company works and what everyone needs to work on. But also by doing this in a way in which you encourage people to experiment with new ways of working with their teams, and this gives people a greater sense of control over their work, which of course has a really important impact on how how you interpret even working more intensively, not as something that is stressful in the same way, but is something that is challenging but rewarding.
Yeah.
So I think that that's and then to touch on the communication thing, one of the other things I see is that there were your companies. It is difficult to over communicate in 4-day week companies, whether it's over scheduling handoffs between teams, whether it's over social and cultural norms or goals, that places that in which people feel able to share successes and failures, to talk about rules, to talk about new practices, that is one of the key things for sort of that differentiates companies that are able to do this from companies that really struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, it's so interesting that you mentioned over communicating, because I'm going to introduce Amy Beacom shortly. And she's going to be talking about the idea that there's a real opportunity around parental leave for parents to think about some of these ideas and put them into action. And a big part of making that successful is communication with your partner, with your colleagues at work, with your boss. And that in general, to live an integrated life is all about communication. You can't just assume things. And so it's really, even though you're using the word over communicate, I want to emphasize communication is so critical to successful working habits. And so what it really is doing is sharpening a quintessential skill, which is good communication and good communication norms at workplaces that help everything work smarter. There's so much more we could say, but to make sure we can get to everybody's questions today, I'm going to introduce Amy Beacom. But I first want to put up a couple more slides, and then we'll see where we go after that. All right. So you're going to be hearing from Amy Beacom. She's got this wonderful book out, the Parental Leave Playbook. As you can see in that quote, although she's talking about parental leave and as an individual, how you can make smarter choices, or as an organization, how you can make smarter choices around parental leave, that this is really about creating better workplaces. And that I love her point. And this is true for Alex's book as well. We're talking about positive societal impacts from these changes. So yes, we're doing this for ourselves, but what we're really talking about here is creating a better society that supports our lives alongside of being excellent at work. You can actually, I'll put the slide up in a second, get a longer description of Amy's book. I'll tell you where in a second. But basically, the idea is that there's kind of three phases that you're thinking about. You're preparing for leave, and that you're assessing kind of what are the strengths that you bring into this process. You're taking your leave and you're getting smart about what you want to advocate for. And then you're returning from leave. Guess what? If you're a first-time parent, you've never been a parent before. And so you're assessing again, acknowledging, hey, wow, I thought I was going to want X, but it turns out I want Y. And so her book does a great job of taking you through these three different phases of preparing for leave as an individual. But Amy brings a lot of skills and knowledge about what workplaces can be thinking about this as well. And if you're excited to hear more about either Alex's book or Amy's book, we've had them on previous podcasts, and you can find them on our YouTube channel as well. So there's lots more information you can learn about both Amy and Alex. All right. So Amy, so glad you're here. Although we were talking about, 4-day work weeks and organizations adopting the whole thing, I thought there were so many overlaps between what you're trying to teach an individual or an organization around parental leave. When you listened in, what struck you as some common themes?
Oh, it's exciting to hear, because it's, of course, as you told me I would, the whole time Alex was talking, I was like, oh, that's true about what I'm doing. That's true about parental leave. And I think that just to start with the conversation around boundaries and communication, the way that let me say this a little differently. My background is in organizational psychology. So I don't come to this work because I necessarily love babies and want to talk about babies all day, although I do. I come to it because I really believe that our work is an integral part of our lives, and how we do that well matters for all of us. And so what sits behind the parental leave playbook is these 10 touch points that everyone navigates through during this transitional time frame that's roughly a year of life that you talked about, those three phases. And all of the skills and abilities and supports and leadership development practices that we talk about throughout that time frame don't just matter during that time frame. I choose it as an entry point and a moment that most people experience, roughly 80% of people experience at some point in their career life cycle, becoming a working parent. And it's really that moment when that work-life conflict vice gets turned a little bit tighter and everyone wakes up to this being an issue. And so if we can hit it at that moment when it becomes an issue and put strong practices and skills in place then within our organizations and within our individuals, we will be better off all around. So boundaries really come alive when you are a working parent and you're going back to work and you're trying to figure out how to do that. So it's a perfect opportunity to have those boundary discussions. I think before I did this work, I did executive development work and leadership offsite. So I think of the parental leave timeframe as the most overlooked leadership development opportunity, but really it's an experiential learning opportunity that any of those offsites I ever did pales in comparison to what we have to harness there. So I like to talk to our clients around thinking about the different types of boundaries that they might be able to put into place. This builds off of Ed Batista's work, who is a brilliant thinker in this area. So he talks about time boundaries, physical boundaries, and mental boundaries. And what I like about Alex's work is it's doing all of those. It's really thinking that through and creating that and creating those conversations around it to make it happen. We also talk about boundary management styles, and that's off of Dr. Kosick's work and her book. I think I'm trying to remember what it's called, A CEO of Me, came out of it. So what she's talking about there is there's different types. There's integrators, there's separators, and then there's cyclers. So how you like to work with your time. And I think that's an important part of this conversation because boundaries aren't just one way for everybody. Some people like to work in a very integrated way. Some people like to work in a very separated way. Some people choose depending on the situation and where they are that day. So I just don't want that to get lost. Anyway, I could keep going on, but I don't know how much time we have.
No, and so what my takeaway is, as you and I've talked before, parental leave is this incredible opportunity for people to jump into this discussion in a very real time because they are experiencing, as you said, the vice tighten up, and that there's only, nothing's going to change the fact that there's 24 hours in the day. And so, parents are real time experiencing the desire to do a great job at work and to also be a great parent. And so that, Amy's helped us in her book show that this is an opportunity. So if you're at that point in your life and you're listening into this live podcast today and you want help thinking about this opportunity, get Amy's book. In fact, Amy, you have something that people can do if they're planning to have a new family member enter their house before February. What is it that you're offering for people?
As we do, part of my company, the Center for Parental Leave Leadership, does certification for parental. We have the only certification program for parental leave coaches in our methods. And as part of that program, we have free coaching in January. So if you are due February or later, or you have someone that you are managing who's due February or later, we are offering free practice coaching for our coaching cohort. Yeah. So I'll give that information to you, Jessica. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, no. So we're hoping what you're doing and listening in today is this realization that there are organizations doing things differently. Alex showed us that. There are people using parental leave, managers, employees, to think differently around how they can do work in life. In a little minute, we're going to introduce one more person to talk about what this means for the future of work for the next generation. But before we go there, there's one more thing I want to talk about, Amy. You mentioned how parental leave is this incredible developmental opportunity. I want to underscore that for a second, because one of the things we've learned at ThirdPath is the act of trying to live an integrated life, even before you have a child, or if you never plan to have a child, the act of trying to live an integrated life helps you learn to be a better manager. I'm going to tell you why I think that's true, and then I want to hear if you agree with me. Because what you're doing is, and we've seen this over and over again, when you're encouraging people to live an integrated life, like Alex and I talked about, they're learning good communication skills. They are learning empathy. They are learning diversity. They are learning that how they're solving it now is different than how they're going to solve it later, and that somebody in their team might have different approaches that they need to learn about too. And so we really believe that, without any cost to the organization, encouraging people to live an integrated life helps them create more creative, more empathetic, better communicators who then can become excellent managers. What do you think about that, Amy?
I agree. Of course, I agree. And the reason why I believe that parental leave is that important time frame, and why I encourage people to think about it this way, is because it's the moment that gives us practice in that. It is an overt, conscious time where we can build these pieces in and practice them. So, for example, you were talking about communication. As part of our leave planning tools, there's a keep in touch strategy. And that is all about communication. So you're consciously practicing, how do I want to be communicated with? And then communicating that. How do I expect to communicate? Where can I set my team up so that they know what to expect of me? So any of these places where you're practicing that communication and then being held accountable for it, you are honing communication as a clarity and integrity tool in your toolbox. So I could go through that with every single of these things that we talk about, and how to use this time to really do that, and how we've built it into the program. But of course, I absolutely agree with that. I'll give an example too. There was something that Alex said earlier. I think, hold on, I just wrote down the word earlier. When you were talking about practicing doing it together, that having that 4-day week really sets you up to do it well together. We see the same thing in parental leave when managers are leading well. And so I had a client recently who had a hard boundary that she was trying to keep so that she didn't hit traffic, that she needed to leave the office at 5:15. If she left any later, it was an hour longer commute. And she came back from leave. This was a thing that was really important to her. And so we talked about talking to her manager about it, setting that boundary. And she did. And then she started to slip. And then it was 5:15, then it was 5:20, then it was 5:25. And on the 4th day, her manager came out of his cubicle, stood up so that everyone in the entire room could see, and said, "Hey, Jessica, it's 5:15, let's go." And made a statement about it for the entire team, so that he set that expectation and he walked out with her. And from then on, the team did as well. So it was a really beautiful way to show we're setting this culture, we're setting this boundary, we're in this together. So that was
wonderful. And yeah, no, absolutely. And so to me, the future is bright, because we have workplaces that are thinking differently. We have moments in our life cycle that really open up an opportunity for us to think differently. And that what ThirdPath's been advocating all year long is the idea that there's a new ideal employee. That new ideal employee is an integrated employee. And I would argue, as an employer, You actually want to interview and listen to people who have a life outside of work and see how they've done that successfully. And then bring those people into your organization, because they're going to have all those skills we were talking about. They're going to be good at prioritization, good at communication, good at triple win boundary setting. And so I believe the future workplace needs to look for people who bring an integrated approach. That's the new ideal employee. With that in mind, I want to introduce one more person into our discussion today. We've been talking about, too many of us feel like our glass is overflowing. And that, in order to get to a place where we live an integrated life, by the way, you can't fill your glass up to the top. Most of the time, you should actually leave a little room at the top of your glass for the unexpected. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love a 4-day work week, is it leaves a little room for the life side and the work side and the unexpected on both directions. So what's filling up our glass? And what we've been learning about is that there's some skills we need to develop ourselves to get smarter about this. And there's things our organizations need to be doing differently to support us to get smarter about this. We've been hearing about how there are 32-hour work week places out there, 4-day work week places out there. We've been hearing about how parental leave is an opportunity to do things differently. But what about right from the start of your career? What if you're thinking about these issues and you want to live an integrated life, and you may or may not have family, but you want to have time for a life and find an organization that really supports you to live an integrated life? Well, that's why I invited one more person to our discussion today, Pilar McDonald. She's the founder of Project Matriarch. I'll let her talk a little bit about what that is in a second. And when we're all together, this is going to be our chance to have your questions answered. I put up some questions as well. So while we're waiting for you to put your questions in the chat box, we can talk about some of these things. When's the right time to start thinking about all this stuff? How will this play out when I'm looking for a job? And how is money related to lowering the risk? So these are some things we'll talk about while we're waiting for you to put up your chat questions. I'm so glad to have Pilar joining us today. Thank you. I know it's a busy time of year to be a student and make time for extra things, but here you are, prioritizing, communicating, doing all this stuff that we've been talking about. When you hear Alex talk about these future workplaces, or Amy talk about these future opportunities, as someone who's, thinking ahead about your career, what comes to mind? Is this exciting for you? Does it make you more hopeful? Do you have questions for them?
Yes, all great questions. My name is Pilar. Yeah, yes to all. I think, I'm at a point where I am definitely very hopeful and excited. And I think that there is a lot of clear momentum on this. And as I'm sure everyone who's listening knows, but the pandemic really was an opportunity to kind of highlight and demonstrate and put that all into light, which I think can be catalyzing for the movement and really important. That being said, I think each semester that kind of goes by, I am more nervous to go into the workplace and what does this really look like and how do I continue working on this from the outside once I'm in the workplace, obviously, as we see, everyone's time is valuable and gets taken up quickly. And so I really want to be able to use this time while I'm still in school to be able to focus on kind of preparing and supporting peers and creating a movement around making that a more supportive environment. But it definitely does feel like time is clicking away. And so wanting to make sure that the urgency stays clear and stands with college students and young people, but also kind of supporters and allies from outside of that to make sure that this is a moment that isn't just past because it's not necessarily as visible or necessary today versus tomorrow or whatnot.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that you guys are doing is trying to think about what would a workplace look like to really support people to have time for their lives. And you've been kind of creating conversations with other students about what can we do to influence change. And you're going to be at that precipice where you're trying to find a workplace that really, hopefully, where you can practice what you've been preaching. When you think about what you've heard today, do you feel hopeful? And if you don't, I have some ideas about how to help people think about this juncture where you're looking for work and trying to find the right workplace that I want to share. But when you think about trying to find that organization, do you see a lot of your peers successful at finding places that really support you to have a whole life, or is that still a struggle out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that is one of the things that we are struggling with the most, and frustration is not necessarily the right word, but kind of where my lack of hope comes from, in that there are clearly so many young people who are committed to making these decisions and wanting to seek out and support workplaces that do make these adjustments and really prioritize providing policies that are supportive of families and kind of that work-life balance and all the things that Alex and Amy, you've been talking about. I think where that comes to head is kind of all these other societal pressures that are coming at us, whether it's the economy, all the other, I don't know, just all the other social injustices that are kind of occurring that are really hitting our generation, and asking young people to make these sacrifices often is hard if it is going for a workplace, because there aren't enough workplaces that are really prioritizing this and supporting it, that, you know, making that decision can sometimes not be what's most financially feasible for everyone or what makes the most sense for every college student. And so I think that yes, like we are excited definitely about the young people who are proud and excited to come forward and be vocal about these ideas, and quickly realizing that that must also come with employer shift or programs like you all are working on, but that needs to be reflected in the employers and the workplaces in order to continue to have that momentum of young people being involved and passionate about it. Because I think it does get to a certain point, as we've seen from previous generations, but where that hope and excitement and drive isn't necessarily lost, but where other things become more of the priority. And so I think that there really is this opportunity when our generation is activated around this issue, especially after the pandemic, or during the pandemic in these waves, and about to go into the workplace, where the conjunction of workplaces and young people standing up to be able to find that point of meeting is really important.
Yeah. And actually, I'm glad you raised it, because, you know, if you think about it, I mean, one simple problem that the American society has is if you're graduating with huge college debt, it becomes very hard to imagine some solutions. But putting that huge and important issue aside for a second, the truth is money and these issues are very intimately connected. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about is, and kind of share this, something I've learned over the years, is that getting out of the box of creating more opportunity around work-life integration is thinking differently about money too. Again, putting this huge college debt problem aside, that if you go to ThirdPath's website this month, you'd see on our blog posts a very innovative way that a young woman figured out how to make its work, where she figured out how to keep her expenses low, pay off her debt, so that she would have then more time and energy to find a workplace that was supportive of her work-life integration goals. But I also think there's something we could be doing proactively, trying to figure out a network of being able to share with people more progressive workplaces that are already in existence, and, you know, really getting the word out that this place is a 4-day work week, paying a good wage. And so there's something that we can do collectively to start putting a spotlight on organizations that are already doing this differently. There's one last idea I want to give out there. Then I'm going to see if Pilar wants to add any other thoughts about, you know, ways to navigate this juncture when you're trying to go out in the world looking for jobs. And then I'll ask Amy if she has any suggestions, or Alex. But, you know, there is this interesting truth of finding the right workplace can make a huge difference. My last observation is, even if you are in a less supportive workplace, you can still make change. And by the way, for the last 20 years, so many people in the ThirdPath community were in less supportive workplaces, and they still figured out how to make change. And a lot of it is some willingness to take a risk early on and see how your organization responds. One of my board members started teaching a class during the work day as a way to see, was his organization going to allow him time and energy to teach something during the day? and time shift his hours to some other time, so that he could start practicing work-life integration skills, and they would start being supportive of him doing that. So there's ways to kind of start looking at your workplace right there and then, no matter where you are, and trying some things differently, or learning how to like turn off work on vacation, even if others aren't doing it. This is a skill set we can start practicing that will help us learn how to work in an integrated way. And we'll be able to see whether others are actually responding positively or negatively to our attempts to set some boundaries in smart ways. Pilar, not to put you on the spot, you might have a thought you want to share about any of this. Then I'll ask Amy if she has any advice for young people at this juncture. Any thoughts, Pilar? None required.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we are doing at Project Matriarchs through an initiative we launched last year called our Pledge to Care is really focusing on kind of asking young people in job interviews to prioritize this. And so being able to take that next step of this is something I care about before I even get the job, before I'm there, which serves the dual purpose of being able to kind of scope out if this is a workplace that is supportive of parent and family friendly policies, as well as kind of just a flexible workplace in and of itself. And it also serves the purpose of showing employers and people interviewing them that this is something that our generation and people looking for these jobs cares about. And so, you know, one thing we are pushing for is if everyone signs on to just asking that one question of what are your parental leave policies like, or what does this look like, you know, or can we speak to an experience of an employee who has had a child, or what does balancing that look like, and all the kind of questions that you guys are asking every day. But if we could get that in the door through the interviews, what would that look like, changing it for both sides?
Yay. And so again, go to our website, read Andrea's story, our recent blog post, and she did just that, Pilar. She made sure she had time to really do a long job search, and she actually observed, are the people at this organization parents? Are the leaders parents? What do their lives look like? And so you're so on target that equipping people to think smart about how to look at an organization will make a big difference. Amy, there might be some advice we have for this next generation who could really help. We could keep them on track to making change. And then I'll ask Alex the same thing.
Well, knowing what Pledge to Care is doing, and everyone should go sign that and promote it any way that they can. They're already on the right track. I think the only thing that I want to say is it can be easy to underestimate your input and your value. I like what you were saying, Jessica, about going into organizations that may not be that way already. A lot of them aren't that way already maliciously. They're just not that way because no one has asked or challenged them to be different. And so, we talk a lot about parental leave as a sort of ask, don't assume time, right? And making those things overt. And so you can practice that muscle during parental leave. But also going into an organization, we see people all the time. It's always been done this way. They just assume that it can't be changed. So I guess I would just say that. The other thing I see for Pilar's generation coming in is how much the older generations are looking to them, because they see them as so brave. They're the ones who are asking those questions in the interview and cutting that path for them. And they're the ones who are going home or not letting things interfere. So in many ways, the older generations are depending on you and excited, just like, please get more of them in there because they're not putting up with it. And we have for so long, and we're in this pattern, but if they can clear it for us, we're going to be benefiting too. So
yeah. Wow, listening to us today got me thinking about something. Alex, I'm going to see if you have some advice for helping people transition to more progressive workplaces. But before we hear from you, Alex, listening to today's conversations reminding me, Pilar, way back 1,000 years ago, I was working in a nonprofit and I did not have kids. It was early in my career. And I had made two decisions that were really smart. I had figured out how, and again, I know this is, very hard today, but I figured out how to live very affordably. And then I asked for an 80% schedule, not because I had kids, just because I wanted to have a life. And I started seeing that people would say yes. And so I think there is some experimentation that you can do early in your career that could help you build your muscle up that this is possible, and give you courage to keep on asking for different ways to do things. Alex, any advice for that next generation around these ideas that we've been talking about today?
I suppose the two things are, number one, that the more this can be sort of something that you push for with others, the more powerful it's going to be and the more sustainable. The second is that in terms of sort of kind of pioneering new practices, but not making it sound sort of too alien, that one of the things that 4-day week companies find is that it's not about just working less, but rather sort of figuring out ways, essentially kind of redesigning the relationship between sort of work and time and professionalism or passion. That moving to a 4-day week is not just about getting a sort of medal for showing up, or sort of or just working less, but rather sort of figuring out how you can do sort of how you can think about professional success or advancement or the cultivation of skills, not as something that is intrinsically tied to working ever longer hours, but rather as something that involves the cultivation of sort of skills around better collaboration, or of working more effectively, or of having greater respect for your own time and for everybody else's. And that's hard stuff. And so I think that sort of the more that for some organizations being able to relate this search to sort of the development of professional norms and sort of expression of a desire to do good work is possible, and I think might make it sort of more sort of palatable and sometimes intriguing for sort of organizations where that's always mattered.
Yeah. To use your line, you're saying to your employer, I want to work smarter. I want to come in and work smarter. I don't want to just keep on throwing more time at something. That's not necessarily the way to work smarter. And I can bring a bunch of skills that I've been practicing all my life, certainly used them when I was in college, to really use my time effectively. I think the other thing I'm hearing you say, Alex, is, you get the whole of me too. And I'm a creative person at work, and I'm a creative person outside of work. And you get that whole of me when I come in and solve things at work. That's going to help me create things and solve things in a smarter way too. I want to encourage people, if you're listening in, that you might have a question. Sergio is going to be reading those questions if you put some in the chat box. This is an opportunity. I've asked all of our guests to stay a little longer today so that we can really have a discussion with and help you think about the next step you want to take around becoming that new ideal employee. Don't lose track of it. I really think this is the future, and you can hold on to that goal and your organization will benefit.
So I think that it's an illustration maybe of how of mentorship going both ways, perhaps. The other thing that I note is that virtually everybody who tells a story about why they implement a 4-day week in their company sort of talks about wanting sort of people coming up in the organization to not have the same kinds of terrible experiences that they did, right? That that
Same with parental leave. Sorry to interrupt, Alex.
I had done, I did years of 70-hour weeks, and sort of it actually really sucked. And it's also not necessary, and it drives out a lot of people who otherwise could have great careers in this industry. And I think we can do it better. And so I think that I'm very heartened that in an era when we think that success is about sleeping under your desk, that that there are people who are very noted in their professions, who are willing to take that kind of stand and say, we're going to change the way that the entire company works, in part to model this kind of behavior for a next generation of of workers and leaders, so that they don't have to continue this sort of stupid abusive way of working that that I had to endure.
Yeah. And again, I think that pick up Alex's book and you'll see this isn't about a sloppy workplace. This is about a smarter workplace where people are producing the same excellent results, just working in a smarter way 4 days a week, and how that works better in a world that's going faster and faster. It's just so much smarter to do it this way. All right. So, as you can see, we have really figured out how to create a conversation where you can learn something new, and we want to make sure that you can continue the conversation. So don't forget, you can do this by joining our Trailblazer Facebook group. You can join us on social media, and you can come back every second Thursday of the month for another event. And just a reminder, we are a nonprofit who has been successfully building a community of role models and change agents. So please help us continue this work and support our free resources like these Thursdays with ThirdPath podcasts by making a small monthly or annual donation through our website. Some last wisdom. Alex, thank you for doing the work you're doing. You are making better workplaces. What's the last thought you have to share?
The last thought tries to connect back to Amy's work and family and smart family leave policies, which is that one of the things that happens with 4-day week companies is that not only is it possible for people to become parents, and as one of them put it, to be fully a parent and fully a CEO rather than feeling like I'm doing half of one and half of the other, but also they come to see working parents as possessing the kinds of skills, organizational skills, empathy, a certain degree of ruthlessness about their time and respect for everybody's time, that is really valuable in a 4-day week company in a way that it is not always not always valued in more conventional firms. And I think that this, part of what this points to is, or it underlines that that for all companies, especially in the future, that I think well-designed parental leave policies can be seen by leadership as a way to build skills in that will improve companies. Right. That this is it's more than a recruitment technique but rather it should be seen as a kind of investment in abilities that will serve both the individual and the organization over the long run. So that's my last thought.
Oh, Amy is so thrilled you said that. And I just want to point out the obvious. You also have a place where men and women can equally take a 4-day work week. And so one of ThirdPath's always been focused on is that it becomes normalized for men to have a 4-day work week and have that day for parenting, if that's what they want, or elder care as well. So you've created a normalized workspace where people can have time to care, which is what we're all about. Amy, thank you for doing the work you're doing to make a better workplace. What's your last thought?
My last thought sort of relates to what Alex is saying is I'm just seeing the thread of policy and practice throughout this conversation. And I know especially with parental leave, people's mind usually goes straight to policy. What's the policy? So I just encourage your listeners and watchers to really be thoughtful about how their policy choices and how they write those policies need to be coupled with the practice that they're trying to get out of them. So for Alex, it's a policy to have a 4-day work week, but what does that mean for your organization? What do you want it to look like in your culture? So with parental leave, you can have a policy, but that's usually just about pay when someone's away. How you put it into practice before, during, and after for that manager, for that team, for your HR, for that new parent is what will make it an important and useful policy that you haven't wasted your money on. So I think just to consider how those interplay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
Well,
they can't survive. One without the other doesn't work, I guess.
yep.
is my point.
No,
Policy is just words on paper.
Yep. Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for listening in today. Thank you for my guests. Really appreciate it. Really, really wonderful call. And tune again next month. All right. Bye-bye.